Okay, class, in this lesson, we're going to learn the options that are available for student loans. We're going to calculate interest due in various student loan situations and then apply the simplified daily interest formula. Okay, let's start with some background on loans, in particular student loans. All right, so here are the different scenarios that a student graduating from high school can go into. Okay, so here are one of the three paths. You can continue to become a student of what's called higher education, which is going to cost money. You can go out and get a job and become employed and start making money, or you can go into the military, and there are various benefits as well by going into the military. For this particular lesson, we're going to focus on number one, which is becoming a student of higher education. Now, higher education is more than just going to colleges and universities. It also includes going to career schools. And career schools are specialized institutions that provide students with specific skills to be successful at a particular job. Okay, and what I have listed here are some areas that students can go into. Okay, so you can choose to go into healthcare, real estate. You can become a welder or go into landscaping, culinary arts, electronics, photography. This is not an exhaustive list, but this gives you an idea of some areas that students can go into aside from going to colleges and universities. Okay, now to go into higher education, for most people, we can't afford the cost of paying for additional education. And so you're going to have to choose to find ways to pay for it. There are essentially two general directions that a student can go into, and that is the federal loan and the private loans. Okay. If a student decides to go the federal loan route, okay, the school that you choose has to be accredited and participate in the federal aid program. Otherwise, you can't get a federal loan. In which case, you're going to have to go and get private loans. And these are loans that are issued by a bank, a credit union, but by the school that you want to attend. They sometimes will provide a loan, or even a state aid agency. Okay. For federal loans, there are essentially two different types of loans. There are what's called subsidized loans, and then the other is the unsubsidized. Okay, the main difference between those two is that in a subsidized loan, to qualify for it, it has to be on a need-based situation, and then interest payments are deferred until after graduations, actually 6 months after graduation. For unsubsidized federal loans, interest will accrue, and it has nothing to do with need-based. So more people will qualify for unsubsidized loans. Okay, now, regardless of the direction you decide to choose, it is really important that you do your homework and understand what you are committing to before signing on the dotted line for any student loan. And when I say do your homework, you have to know your numbers, meaning you need to understand what you're ultimately going to pay at the end of the term of the loan. Okay, now we're going to go through a few examples here to help you understand what's involved so that you can be better educated. All right, so in this example, we have an incoming college freshman, Ariana, and she receives a 10-year, $9,100 federal direct unsubsidized loan. Okay, the key thing here is unsubsidized, and the interest rate on this loan is 4.29%. She knows that she can begin making loan payments 6 months after graduation, but interest will accrue from the moment the funds are credited to her account. So that's one of the drawbacks to an unsubsidized loan, is that interest starts to accrue on day one. Okay. The question here is, how much interest will accrue while she's still in school and over the 6-month grace period for this freshman year loan? Okay. So the equation to solve for this is I is equal to PRT, and P represents the principal amount, which is the loan amount. The R stands for the rate that she's being charged, and then time. In this case, it's going to be 4.5 years, because she has 4 years to finish school, plus a 6 months period before she has to start her payment. Okay, so plugging those values in, we're going to put in 9,100 as our principal. We're going to have the rate of 0.0429. Remember that we have to change the percentage into decimal. And then the time that she has is going to be 4.5 years. Okay, punching that into the calculator, we get 429 times $1,756.76. Okay, so that is the amount of interest that will accrue while she's still in school and over the 6-month grace period after graduation. Okay, now example 2 asks the following, but before we go to that, we need to go over one other scenario that's happening, and that is after example 1, assuming that Ariana chooses to wait until she has to start paying her loan, her new principal amount will be the amount that she borrowed, which is $9,100, plus the interest that we just calculated. That gives us a grand total of $10,856.76. This scenario is called interest capitalization. Okay, so in this next example, we're going to determine the interest that Ariana will pay after interest capitalization. Okay, so what this means then, therefore, is that we're going to need to calculate her monthly amount. She's going to be paying this over a 10-year period, so that's 120 months. So we're going to take the monthly amount, multiply by 120, and then we're going to subtract the original amount that she owed, which was $9,100, to determine total interest that she's going to be paying after interest capitalization. Okay, so we're going to use this monthly equation that we learned from the previous lesson, and we're going to enter the principal amount. Now remember, the interest amount has changed due to interest capitalization, so that amount is now going to be $10,856.76, and we're going to multiply that by the rate of 4.29% divided by 12, and we're going to multiply that by 1 plus the rate again, 4.29% divided by 12, raised to the 12 times 10 power. T is 10 years. And we're going to divide this by 1 plus the rate of 4.29% divided by 12, raised to the 12 times 10 power minus 1. Okay, and if we enter this into the calculator, we would get $111.42. Okay. And then we would need to multiply this by 120 months because she's going to be paying this over a 10-year period. And that works out to $13,370.40. Okay, so to determine the interest that she's going to be paying, we have to subtract out the original principal amount, which is $9,100, and punching that into the calculator, we would get $4,270.40. Okay, so that is the total interest that Ariana will be paying after interest capitalization. Okay, so the key thing to recognize is that even though the monthly payment seems affordable, okay, $111.42, there are two things going on that we need to be aware of. This payment is going to be made over 10 years. And we have a delayed interest payment, meaning that the interest was accruing during the 4.5 years. And because of that, that principal amount grew to $10,856.76. Okay. And the result of both of those scenarios means that the loan of $9,100 is going to cost Ariana a total of $4,270.40, okay, which is almost half of what she is borrowing. So this is where a lot of people don't understand the cost of borrowing money, especially when it comes to student loan. So we need to be very careful and understand. And when I say do your homework, this is what I mean, to really understand the numbers so that you understand the true cost of borrowing money. Okay, now, example 3 says that suppose that Ariana only paid the interest during her 4 years in school and the 6-month grace period. What will Ariana now pay in interest over the term of her loan? Okay, so assuming that she'd been paying just her interest over the 4.5-year period, then we would continue the same calculation, except instead of using the interest capitalization as our principal, we're going to go back to the original loan amount, which was $9,100. Okay, and then we're going to use the same rates again of 4.29%, and we go ahead and follow the same formula that we used in the previous example. And this is all going to be divided by 1 plus the rate again, divided by 12, raised to the 12 times 10 power minus 1. And punching this in the calculator, we would get $93.39. Ariana, of course, would be making this payment over a 10-year period, which is 120 months. And that amount will come out to $11,206.80. And the interest that she'll be paying would be, we would have to subtract $9,100 from that amount. And that interest she would be paying is $2,106.80. Okay, now remember, what we just calculated, this $2,106, is after the 4 years and the 6-month grace period. So it's only that, from that time on for 10 years is the interest that she's paying. But we want to know how much interest she's paying over the term of her loan. So we need to also incorporate the previous value. And let's go back to example 1. And that was $1,756.76. So we need to add that back in, $1,756.76. And then punching that into the calculator, we would get a total of $3,863.56 that she would be paying in interest for this loan. Okay, so obviously if she paid interest during her time in school, the amount that she would be paying in total would be significant, well, not significantly, but it would be less than what she would be paying if she didn't pay interest at all. Okay, $4,270. So that's a difference of about $300. So she'd be saving herself a little bit amount of money. But nonetheless, it's still fairly costly. Okay, now let's take a look at the next example. It's saying that in example 3, Ariana chose to pay only her interest each month, which was due on the 1st of the month. How did Ariana calculate the interest she needed to pay? Well, the interest that you would pay since the last payment is equal to the principal amount times the number of days since last payment times the interest rate divided by 365. Okay, or interest that you would have to pay is equal to the principal times the number of days since last payment times the interest rate divided by 365. Okay, so let's go ahead and enter those values. Our principal was $9,100. and we would multiply that by the number of days. So since last payment would be 31 days, okay, since there are 31 days that elapses from 1 month to the next, and then times the interest rate, which was 0.0429 divided by 365, and punching that into the calculator, we would get $33.16. So this is the interest that Ariana needed to pay each month while she was in school. All right, hopefully this made sense to you. We went through a few different scenarios in our calculations, but if you had any questions or something didn't make sense, please go back to the beginning of this recording and listen to it again. Thank you.